Aloha, folks, and welcome to the Empowered Hour here on the island of Maui. And today I have a really special guest. I actually got to do some training with her in 2019, and I've been scared of her ever since. Um, no, so today I have Rachel Collins on. I'm super excited to have you. Rachel, where are you in the world?
I am in the Pacific Northwest. I'm in Oregon.
Awesome, awesome. How's the weather out there?
It is to my perception, a very rainy and cold May, but I am from the southern US, the very tropical southern US, so I am always feeling like it's not sunny enough, but we're getting it a little bit. It's getting there in terms of
Okay.
summer. Just takes a while out here.
Sweet. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for making the time to come see me and be on. There's
Yeah,
so much to talk about. Uh, First off, congratulations. You just had a match
thank
and it looked really freaking badass.
Thank you. I have been struggling to describe what that was like, and I will attempt, in this conversation, I'm sure, but, everyone's been really supportive about it, and I really, I really appreciate that. Overall, it's been really, really nice to have, know that people that are all the way across the world are hoping that I win my little, dinky MMA fight. So it's
For
fun to have.
sure. No, that's awesome. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about your MMA journey? How did you get into it? What compelled you to want to do MMA? I know that that's, definitely a selective group of women who feel comfortable in that realm, and then also in the process of it going through it, it's its own beast when it comes to a process of empowerment. And I think that just from a bird's eye view, you've really taken the harness, taken the reins, and really gone with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's constructive for me to have this conversation right now also because this fight was less than 2 weeks ago. It was the weekend before last. I have been an empowerment self-defense instructor for about 9 years now, and my ability to sort of understand the connection between martial arts and ESD has grown that entire time. When I first started with both of those, either of those, I had very little background. I started teaching without really a support network, or I didn't get training like you and I were at together until
Yeah.
several years into when I was already uh, working, teaching self defense, and so being able to kind of like process it out loud with someone, especially like another ESD instructor, is also helpful for me because it does feel like a pretty uh, specific Venn diagram. I'm not sure if there are any other ESD instructors in the world that are amateur MMA fighters. So I feel like this is an opportunity to sort of, parse out those connections and differences. I know there's a lot of overlap between those two areas. A lot of VSD instructors and participants are or become martial artists, and some don't. So,
Yeah.
it's a Venn diagram for sure, but figuring out those boundaries is has been really educational, and I'm sure it'll continue to be.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I know that a lot of people, they go through this process, and as they're going along, different things come up along the way, adverse situations with different men in the industry. What has been your experience with that, and how have you combated that along the way?
Well, I mean, the as nutshell as possible version of my life story of the last decade
Right,
is
yeah,
that when I started teaching self-defense, I knew that I was part of a small group of women. We wanted to start teaching self-defense, and we wanted it to be based in feminism. We wanted it to be based in our backgrounds at the time, which were sexual assault response in my case, and education in general, violence prevention, public health education, and we wanted to bring those together. We did not at the time know that we were not the first people to think about this. We found out that we were not. We were reinventing the wheel for only a short time before we realized, oh wait, smart women for many years before us have figured this out, and we have some foundation to build on. But that foundation wasn't very accessible to us. We did sort of feel like we needed to reinvent the wheel because there weren't a lot of accessible, mentors that were actively teaching, or, a
Yeah.
way to access that. We were lucky to find what we did, and it wasn't a lot. Um, and we started out by bringing in a contracting trainer who was teaching essentially Krav Maga. And we were teaching the verbal portion. We were doing like an addendum to that sort of. Uh,
Nice.
and those are two very different things. Self-defense without the empowerment lens is a very different thing than self-defense with the empowerment lens. And I've spent a lot of time in both areas of that. So over time, I kind of tell the story of like, first I was just watching the trainings, or I wasn't really involved. And then I did the training one day. Someone taught me how to throw a punch, and my almost immediate reaction was, I didn't even realize you could do that. And I never want to do anything else ever again. Like, please give me more of this. And so I got very involved in, Krav Maga training at that point. I sort of went through the whole program of the gym that I was at that was teaching Krav Maga. And then in the meantime, I had begun teaching self-defense at an MMA gym. Like, they were renting me the space, renting space to put on these trainings. And so I started, once I sort of tapped out the Krav Maga gym of everything that I kind of reached the end of their curriculum, I started doing boxing and Muay Thai, striking, like stand-up fighting martial arts. And, got a lot more comfortable with that, but still, would never have considered that I could fight someday. Like, it just didn't occur to me. I knew people did that, but I just reflexively, in the way that I think women often do, I was like, well, I could never do that. Like, or I didn't even think I could never do that. It just didn't occur to me that that was an option open to me. And part of that was internally, you sort of, it was a big deal for me to find any kind of physical pursuit. When I found Krav Maga, I had never been involved in sports. I felt, very disconnected from my body, like traumatized around that in the way that most girls end up being. And so I didn't feel like I had sort of like the empowerment, I suppose, to use my body in that way. Krav Maga and self-defense changed that, but the level of like physical intensity and technical prowess that something like MMA requires is different than like a recreational adult Krav Maga program. So to me, that was a lot more intense once I started getting involved in sparring. And I really didn't want to do jujitsu at that point. I didn't want to do grappling. I think that's also something that tracks with what I hear a lot of other women talk about, is that they don't want to do that. It doesn't seem like something that they could ever do. And, it's too many of them have bad experiences in gyms when they first try. And it's also just, I struggle. Like, I struggle to do the contact part of that because
Yeah.
it's overwhelming. I mean, it's overwhelming
Close quarters.
for anyone, I think. But if you have any kind of history of like, violence or like loss of control of any kind, then like getting held down is probably not something you want to recreationally do on a random Wednesday night, So I started doing that, and I was very lucky to find a very good teacher who is now my MMA coach, who, along with women at the gym who sort of took, as few as there were and are, some that were very supportive and like, took me under their wing, made sure I always had a female partner for class, which is still something that I really, value, and that I think not enough women have access to. And so I ended up getting involved in jujitsu. I started taking wrestling. And then I went to Israel for more self-defense training a year and a half ago, I guess. And part of the story for me is that there I took the second impact course that I had ever taken.
Yeah.
And that was a very educational experience for me in some ways. I think that, part of it too is I laughed when you were talking about us taking training together and you being scared of me ever since. But the part of that story you don't tell is that on the first day, someone offered you a pool noodle to like hit them with, and you took them up on that as enthusiastically as anyone could, honestly, like, and with more like sort of, assurance than, a lot of women have access to. And so I feel like you and I were possibly the
We were
most enthusiastic in that group because we had previous training, and so that was, my memory of you from that
well,
training.
I still remember going shoulder to shoulder with you, and then I pinned you, but I threw I pulled a groin muscle in the process, and I was like, this is my total old woman moment, folks. It's like, it's happening. This is the first step. Gray hairs after this. And I was like, God damn it. And then you were going, oh, are you okay? Are you okay? I was like, no, please don't say anything. Just walk away. Like,
Sorry.
let's not talk about the groin muscle. Let's talk about the win here. It was a pin. I remember it.
Sorry that I don't remember that part. I just remember you being badass. And if pulling a muscle or having gray hairs makes you an old woman, then I have been very elderly since about age like 23.
There you go, right?
At this point, 8 years later, I'm just the crypt keeper, I suppose. But I think that, what was I saying before this? I was talking about how, I took Impact in Israel, and that was
what was that like for you? Second time around, it was more intense. You actually had weapons at that training versus the first time.
I didn't do the weapons part of the training. I think that it was my second Impact training, and the reason that it was like momentous for me to an extent is because by that point I had a lot of martial arts. I had started MMA training, like with the MMA team at the gym that I'm at, and the level of I think that I was not the typical Impact student in some ways. The I had went on for longer than it should have, but I think what that I scared myself, I think, is what happened during that, because the level of like physical aggression that I am capable of and like force that I am capable of.
Yeah.
That was like jarring to me at the time. And I think too, it was definitely something that challenged the parts of martial arts that are still challenges to me. The longest part of that fight was me getting stuck in side control, which is a jujitsu, that's what we would call it in jujitsu. But it is still like the thing that will, for lack of a better term, like trigger me in class and make it really difficult for me to participate in MMA training in the way that I watch my, male teammates and, a lot of my other teammates be able to participate. Like that is an obstacle for me, is that, that like loss of control will make me a lot less able to execute the things that I need to execute in some cases. And it's definitely something that I have to work with myself on, and be nicer to myself than I often actually am in terms of talking about, that this is something that I am not the only woman that experiences this. And it's something that I think, prevents a lot of women from starting or staying engaged in more intense martial arts practice is that kind of difficulty. So the fact that I was able to do the things that I was able to do in that Impact fight, which were not all self-defense, my MMA muscle memory came out in that as well. They didn't teach us to like, mount the suited instructor and like start throwing elbows, but that's what I had been taught in MMA. So I had sort of a mixture of muscle memory in that.
Yeah.
But I was, I guess, like taken aback by my own reaction in terms of the level of skill that I was able to show, and also just the loss of control that I had, honestly, of like which muscle memory I was using and the choices I was making. So it gave me a lot of ideas about differentiating between the two, wanting to be able to differentiate between the two.
Yeah.
And, what was actually true for me in terms of, I'm an ESD instructor, I'm, have a significant level of training in martial arts, and yet that, Impact course was difficult for me. It looked different than some other women who take trainings like that, but the effect on me was, the same, in some ways. And that was not something that I could escape just by, becoming an expert. And so I think it brought me, sort of to a level of reality of, oh, okay, it's not that gaining a level of physical skill doesn't help in terms of, overcoming the mental barriers that we get and that ESD addresses, but it's not everything. You have to do the internal work too, and it's gonna come out somehow. But I got done with that impact uh, training. I came back to the US, and I asked for an MMA fight. And I didn't coordinate those two things at the time. Looking back though, I think I can see that I wanted an outlet. I wanted a way to train as intensely as I wanted to train.
Hmm.
And I wanted to explore more so the things that trip me up, the things that, hold me down from being able to get the level of skill that I want or have the level of confidence that I want. And for me, learning MMA has been one part of trying to understand that for myself and to overcome some of those things.
Yeah. So, you had talked about the emotional toll that it takes on you, how, you switched from doing more ESD tactics to stuff that you have practiced when it comes to MMA. What were the thoughts going through your head at that time, just as far as processing? Because I think that especially when people are experiencing these types of trainings, they do get triggered in a lot of different ways. And
Mhm.
I always think that it's really important for people to express that and share that so that they know that when they're going through our trainings, they're not alone.
Right. And I was really lucky. I mean, at all of the, the impact trainings that I've had and, other trainings like that, I was really lucky to have a lot of support, from my
Hmm.
cohort members in the training, from instructors, from, various mentors in empowerment, self-defense, and martial arts, that I've been really lucky to be able to, develop through those networks. So I've been really lucky in that way. I have a lot more support than, a lot of other people do who are tackling those things. So I'm really grateful for that. But I think that it took me some time to figure out how to even begin processing that. And that's why, this fight that just happened to an extent seems like a bookend to that to me in my
Yeah.
mind, because, I came back from that and I asked for an MMA fight. I got one right away and then COVID happened. And so, the gym shut down and the fight was canceled. And, I had similar COVID experiences to a lot of people where, I was being more isolated. I was less able to train. And so what ended up happening is that once we could train again, I became very heavily involved in the MMA training. I hadn't really, I think, understood what had happened to me, like sort of psychologically with the impact training. I didn't really have self-awareness yet
Hmm.
about what the effects of that were on me. So I kind of just continued on and was like, well, I'm going to train harder now. I really want to learn to escape that position. I really want to learn to be able to get out of the things that were, able to physically, hold me in that impact experience. And so I sort of just threw myself into MMA training, for a lot of reasons. And I love it. It's not only a way to sort of understand my psychology, it's also just the thing that I will choose to do several hours a day, if I'm able to. And I'm really lucky that I have been able to recently. And so I came back, I threw myself into that. And I was learning a lot. I was going to jiu-jitsu. I was getting much more skill. I was, feeling good about it in a lot of ways. And I also, for a while though, there were no other women in the MMA team trainings. I'm really lucky now that that's not the case. I have one other consistent, female MMA training partner, which is, she's wonderful for a lot of reasons, not just being another woman in class. But at the time, I was the only woman in class. I was the least physically strong in class, as often happens to women who are the only one in class. Not always, but sometimes. And I was training so much, and it started to, I didn't have self-awareness about it, but it started to take a toll, because you're getting, physically overpowered all the time. That's
Yeah.
how, that's what training is like. That's what should be happening, is that you're coming up against challenge, and with the woman that I train with now, like, we're challenging each other all the time. Like, she'll have
Yeah.
good of good days, and some days you're the hammer, some days you're the nail, some days I'm just getting taken down, I'm on my back constantly because of she's really good. But there's a difference, with we can be sort of head to head giving full force, and like I can put up a fight, like an effective fight with her.
Yeah.
With most men my size, and any bigger and even smaller, they're gonna be able to hold me down with one hand, and that's what was really happening in that case. I have a lot of really good training partners, that are men at the gym, but it's different, and it's an experience of like knowing that you're outpowered a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and that has an effect, at least on me, if I'm not processing it, and if I'm not sort of getting some experience where that isn't the case, it starts to just add up. Your body doesn't know the difference. Like I can know that this, kid I'm sparring with does not mean me harm, is not in any way dangerous, like is a good training partner, and I'm really happy that we're sparring together. Like all of that can be true, and I can know that. And that doesn't mean that I can convince lizard brain, that's in there too, that is just understanding like, oh, you are feeling physical stress, someone's on top of you right now, and you like can't escape. Like
Yeah.
that's what lizard brain understands, and I have a hard time sometimes convincing her that like it's a game, it's gonna be okay, like this is what should be happening.
Yeah.
And so being able to, that's part of the challenge that I have been working on, but it started to take a toll and I didn't really understand it. And I luckily had support around that once I started to realize that it was having a negative effect on my overall well-being.
So
So
just as some examples of taking a toll, what does that look like for people?
I think that, I think that when we think about stress on your body and your brain in general, sometimes when I'm talking about this, I think like, what would I say to a student of mine who is dealing with the same challenges? And I would say something like, whether you're hungry or nervous or stressed out or dealing with past trauma or just, hurt because someone is, in this situation of sparring, maybe not hurting you, but, controlling you physically, your brain and your body don't necessarily know the difference, that is whether that's violence or whether that's not, unless you're actively trying to process that. So when I'm not successfully processing that, as one example, I become more scared of the world, kind of negative in my outlook
Mm-hmm.
of things. I will just, the thing that I struggle with the most, like visibly, in class at least, is that in certain like control positions in jujitsu, my brain will just go, "Welp, no hope. You might as well just be still and hope it's over soon." Get your hooks in, get your frames in, make sure that like minimize the damage, and then I can't move. And it's disturbing because I know what to do in a lot of cases. I
Mm-hmm.
drilled it 1,000 times. I know that I'm not in any danger. I'm not even in the level of like controlled danger that an MMA fight is when I'm sparring. I'm very safe. I'm in a padded room with my friends, essentially, or with
Yeah.
people that don't mean me harm at the very least. And so, but that doesn't necessarily come through. So you go into fight or flight, but it's not just fight or flight. You also have freeze. And that's what ends up happening. It's like a level of stress arousal that goes beyond being able to respond with anything. And it's just, minimize the damage and sort of wait, and you kind of check out. And it's not fun, like it's
Yeah.
not a fun experience to, have, I'm in that training every day when we can train, so if that's happening on a consistent basis, I can know that I'm safe and that that's not, consistent harm happening to me, but my body doesn't know that. So I start to just get the effects of someone who is experiencing, something scary on a daily basis, where you kind of like turn inward and, just get sort of unconvinced of the safety of the world is what
Yeah.
happens slowly if I'm not watching it.
Well, you're bringing up some really great points. I think that so many people, are going through these different triggers, and maybe they're a psych background like me, or they, they have fighting experience and they don't understand why that's still happening or why their body is still reacting in that way. But especially if you have past trauma and it was extreme, or you have, complex PTSD or something along those lines, those are just naturally going to come up throughout your life. And it's how you respond to them, um, how you support yourself through those times that I think is so important. But I think that it's really great that you're actually sharing because of how many years of experience you have in this industry. And for people to understand that, yes, you can still do that. I've had years and years of experience, and I still have moments where situations come up. And like I posted one the other day on ESD's movement page, so I was just like, what's going on here? Why am
Mhm.
I responding in this way?
Mhm.
So I think that it's really great. The other thing that I was thinking about is you had talked about you shifted modes and you were kind of shocked by the power that you have. Um, and that is something that I know for a lot of women who have come into different trainings that I've done. For some people, that's something that they don't want to explore.
Mhm.
They experience it and then they're like, oh my God, I do not want to hurt somebody. I don't want to hit them. What would you say towards somebody when it comes to that? I know that for us, when we did our first impact training, uh, I was thinking, okay, I have in my head, I'm going to do this ESD thing.
Mhm.
I've trained in, 7 styles of Japanese martial arts and Tai Chi, and what stuck was the ninjutsu and jujitsu that suddenly came out when I was doing the impact, and I was like, wow, my main style was Aikido. Where was that one? you know, like I wasn't doing that under high stress.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, so that was really interesting. I just wanted to get your take on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think again, I think you started out talking about how all of this training. I think you and I are examples of this. Like all of this training in the past. I think that for me, at least, like I started teaching I started, being a self-defense instructor at 23. I was not. My brain was, I was. Everyone is growing all the time, but I definitely was not like a grown up yet in my brain, at least to my perception now. And I think that to an extent, sort of took shelter in the idea of like, oh, well, I'm a self defense instructor. So I ain't scared of nothing, like I don't have to worry about this. And I would have empathy. Like, I mean, I'm a good ESD teacher. When my students are triggered in class, I know what to do. I know what to respond with, how to support them. I'm still learning those things, but I, can function really well in that role. I've been a rape crisis counselor, and I talked about, a domestic violence advocate, those
Yeah.
things. I have a lot of education in that. And I also have a lot of education in combat and like physical, ability to execute those techniques too. But I think for me, I also sort of unconsciously developed the myth of like, well, if I'm an expert in these things, then like trauma shruma, I don't need to talk about that. That's not, that's not a thing that affects me. That's for other people. And so I think that sort of slowed down my understanding to an extent.
Hmm.
I can still fall into that trap, but hopefully less and less. So that was part of it, of that, we're not exempt when we learn this stuff. Female martial artists are not exempt from, the possibility of violence, because just knowing that stuff is not enough. I can know all the escapes from side control I want. If I'm going to freeze in that moment, though, none of that's going to matter, because my brain still believes there's no hope. Just learned helplessness is what kicks in, of just like, there's no possibility of escape from this. It's not worth trying. Is
Hmm.
the mode that your brain can snap into, despite this level of training. So that's part of it. And then also just thinking about muscle memory, it's been really fascinating. You were talking about one style coming out when you would think that another would. During impact, I was doing MMA things, which was, interesting. I was bringing a different lens to that. And I wasn't necessarily able to choose. Your body chooses what it thinks is going to be effective to protect you in the
Yeah.
moment. So MMA came out in that context. But what's been interesting too is that, um, a recent example that I still haven't, I still don't fully understand, is that before an MMA fight, or before, a lot of combat sports, you have to make weight, which I
Mm.
can have a whole conversation about how that, affects women because it's different. You have to get to a certain weight before you can fight.
So you had to
For
gain weight?
I had to lose weight. You always are losing weight. So you're losing weight, you're trying to have the highest level of success in your weight class. So for instance, if I'm not paying attention at all, I will, kind of average out at like 140. I have to weigh in for my fights at 125 though.
How tall
And
are you?
5'7",
Okay.
almost 5'6.5".
Okay.
So 125 is not a healthy weight for me.
No.
And part of what you do is for me, at least for this one, like 10 pounds of that was diet, like 2 to 3 months leading up to that, of just like, slowly, safely as possible, decreasing your weight. And then a chunk of that at the end though is dehydration. So you weight cut by like going to a sauna, you cut off, essentially fast for like 2 days. And then you do the weigh in, you rehydrate yourself for 24 hours before you actually have to fight.
Wow.
Not an ideal system. I don't really have a better suggestion right now, but it's not it. If you have any kind of history of disordered eating, which I do, you are gonna want to be intentional about how you do that. What it also leads to though is you feeling like weaker and weaker as your training is getting more and more intense. And so
Wow.
training is ramping up, but your level of fuel is decreasing. And you're balancing between those ideally. This was the first time I had ever done it. So all of that to say, just to give some context if people are not MMA fans, all of that to say that, leading up to this fight, I was training harder and harder and also feeling less and less physically strong, and because you're hungry and you're,
Yeah.
in calorie deficit for a long period of time. And what I found during that though, is that when I was sparring, feeling weakened, what started coming out was ESD and impact in my MMA sparring. So there was a few weeks ago, kind of at the peak of it, which was the hardest part, it didn't take any more side control or a control position where someone's weight is all on me to make me freeze. It took something as simple as like someone stronger than me, having a grip on me and not letting go. And I would just not be able to address it. Like I wouldn't just want to just like back away. Like I would go into de-escalation stance and want to like back away slowly. That's not what you do in MMA in that situation. No. And I mean, the two examples, again, this was just like a couple weeks ago that really showed me like, oh, okay, this is interesting. I don't understand this fully, is that in one instance, sparring with someone that I know pretty well, he's a great partner. I trust him to spar with me and to not hurt me. In the heat of, punching and kicking and trying to knock down this person to wrestle them, I instinctively like left the mat. I like wanted to leave the situation so badly that I like went to like back away off of the mat, like backed into my coach, trying to leave the situation, which is not what you do at all in MMA. You don't leave. This is the field of play. This is not, I wasn't playing the game anymore is the thing.
Your body was just done.
Yeah, I wasn't able to play the game anymore. I was reacting to it as though it was a threat. And the other, thing that happened with that is that I've been taught in Impact is that there are situations where you would get into a kicking from the ground position. So going from standing to going in a kicking from the ground position, which when I was taught that in Impact seems so counterintuitive. Like I want to be on my feet. That's a position of advantage. For me, being on the ground is a position of disadvantage. I'm not a black belt or anything in jiu-jitsu. My very new blue belt skills are not going to help me in a lot of situations. I want to be on my feet if I can. However, on one of these nights when I was trying to spar, someone had a grip on me and I went down to the ground. Like I did the Impact thing. I think because my brain was like, you're weak right now. Like you are not strong in this situation. You can't, and went into something that it identified was going to be more helpful for me. And that was just fascinating because it was sort of the reverse. It was things that I would never do. I'm not, that had just never happened to that extent before. So I think the fact that I was sort of depleted and feeling less capable brought out other muscle memory that I really did not expect to surface at that point. So that was just a really, really tough training camp experience for the first one. I think I'll be
Yeah.
like prepared if I get another chance to try that out. But it was very illustrative of the ways that that can go back and forth, and how, you know, your body is trying to defend you, and it's not always going to look like what you want it to look like.
Yeah, well, that's the logical side of your brain, and then there's the more primal side of your brain that's taking over, and it's like, okay, it's go time. Like, this is what we know. This is what we're going to use. There's this woman, Tracy Arlington, who does something called Play It Safe Defense, and I did a co-teaching thing with her last year here on the island, and one of her favorite moves is Chihuahua Crazy. So basically, like, you grab somebody grabs hold of you and you drop to the ground and kick. And for me, like, that was one of the first times besides impact where I'm using kicking, because I don't teach people kicking. Like, that's one of the few areas that I'm just like, I like being on my feet. I think it's important. So it's nice to have those different aspects that you can incorporate into your work, and realize that there's lots of different ways of protecting yourself.
Mhm.
And I think that it's great that you're studying all of these different styles too, because I do think that there's some form of greatness in every style, and there's certain things that you can take from every single style that are going to help you in your ESD journey, whatever that is. So when it came to you fighting that day, I just kind of want to go over what was that like? What was it, going on in your head during the time? It, I just saw pictures, but I see pictures that look super intense, and yeah, I just was curious what, the inside scoop was on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a relevant part of the backstory too is that I didn't originally think that I could fight. I didn't think that I could get to that level of skill. Um, the challenges I've had in the training that, a lot of my teammates do not have, also sort of at some points put me back into that myth of, like, never enough to make me quit, obviously, because I just couldn't, but I felt like I should. I wanted to some of the time, because I was just like, this is not, I don't know if I am able to overcome that. I don't know if it's possible for me to continue, like, throwing myself at this barrier. Like, is this going to be successful? Am I going to be able to? I guess I worried that I would reach some sort of ceiling on the level of skill I could develop. And I mean, part of it too is that I train with people who are really good. I train
Yeah.
with a couple professional fighters and a lot of amateur, fighters that are, some of them have a lot of experience, and we also just have really good training. Like, I have a lot of good things to say about the MMA program at our school. It's a high level of skill. So I was judging myself against a high bar as someone who has never fought before, who is not a typical amateur MMA person, in that, my main training partner is 21 years old. I am 31 years old. And so I'm not out of the range of when people MMA fight, but I'm out of the range of when most people start, or when, most people would choose to devote 10 to 15 hours a week to training the way that I do. That's a strange career turn to make later in life, And so there's that. There's, I didn't have any sports background when I started. There were a lot of things that made it seem like that maybe wasn't going to happen for me. And then on top of that, getting an opponent when you're getting your first fight in general, but especially when you're doing it as a woman, I was thinking about the Venn diagram of, MMA, amateur MMA, women's amateur MMA, flyweights, Northwest flyweight, people who are training right now, who have, like, some, training through COVID so that their fitness is high, people who are available for this fight date, and who can make weight on time, And so for this specific fight, I had 3 previous attempts to fight over the last 3 years fall through because the opponent pulled out. So I, like, had a date, and then,
Hmm.
no one to fight. So all trained up and nowhere to go. And then for this specific fight, the woman I ended up fighting, much credit to her for taking it on relatively short notice. Luckily, she was in, clearly really good shape. She went for 3 rounds and gave me a hard time. So um, she was the 4th opponent that I had been scheduled for this date. I had 3 previous opponents pull out. My coach said he had never seen that many pullouts for one fight before. So
Wow.
while I'm struggling with this training, it's also not entirely clear that there's gonna be a point to it because I
Yeah.
don't think I'm gonna be able to actually do it. So all of that, and I was so happy that it finally, happened. I made it there. I made weight. I, got through the training. I broke my toe during the training, like pulled
How?
my hip, twisted my ankle, like all of these injuries I had healed and, things I had sort of gotten to. And you know, it worked out. At some point you're actually there and you're actually getting locked into an octagonal cage with someone who also wants to win this fight just as badly as you do. And um I think I sound a little bit like anyone who's had their first fight where they just get like really philosophical about it for a while, but I was very people told me what that would be like, or sort of gave me hints, I guess, of what that experience would be like, but it nothing can sort of describe what that is like regardless of how it goes.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, my my coach told me that he was flabbergasted by the way that I acted during it, and I don't think he's an easy person to flabbergast, so I felt a little bit accomplished. No one was more flabbergasted than me though, because I struggle really hard in practice. Like I am not a great practice partner. I have a really hard time controlling my force because I have a hard time remembering that it's a game as soon as I have any amount of adrenaline.
Yeah.
It's struggle for me to do the technique right, have any thoughts at all once I have adrenaline. Like to me, I just sort of go on an autopilot, some of the time, which is not ideal. You want to be able to make decisions and like think of safety during those things. And I'm lucky that I have a really good coach and really good teammates who can help me with that because it's something that's really hard for me.
Yeah.
And during this fight though, I have never experienced being able to hear my coach talking while I was under that level of adrenaline. Like this is different than sparring. You're actually trying to knock each other out. You're
Yeah.
actually to get each other on the ground and win the fight. And so, that was as intense as it would be for anyone, but I could hear my two corner coaches, telling me what to do. I did not hear or think about, I wasn't nervous at all.
That's awesome.
And I don't say that to be, sort of like bragging about it. I'm
No,
saying it
you
because
were in the zone. That was good.
that like I did not have a moment even walking into it where I felt nervous. I wasn't like psyching myself up or like punching the air as they're announcing me. I was just sort of like snapped into this weird calm. I could hear what I needed to hear and I could have thoughts about the technique. Like I followed the rules, which I was worried about. I thought, maybe I get so much adrenaline and I break the rules. I do something you're not supposed to do that gets you disqualified. I pull out Krav Maga and I actually end up hurting somebody. I don't want to do that, And so I wondered what would happen to me just given how I react to adrenaline in training, which is so hard for me. This was easy. Like it
Yeah.
not hard in any way the way that training is. I was able to think and make decisions and be strategic. I was, in my coach's estimation, like calm and composed, which are words that never describe me in sparring. And so it's very interesting to me that as terrible as I am at sparring some of the time, that seemed like the reverse once I was actually, implementing it. And the part of the explanation I can think of is just that I think part of the difficulty of training is threading the needle between doing it correctly and not hurting anyone, because you don't want to hurt partners. You don't want to knock them out. You want them to spar with you again the next day.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And I think for me, that might be the difficult part, because when you are doing it correctly, you are knocking someone out. You are winning the fight. You are exerting that level of force.
Yeah.
And that, once that constraint was removed, it was like I could think there were no competing thoughts, as someone who sort of can, fall into the having a lot of competing thoughts a lot of the time. This was the one experience I can think of where I had one mission, and I was finding it pretty easy to do. So I'm really curious how future experiences will be, because I don't think I fully understand this one yet.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a really uplifting experience for you. I'm wondering, I'm just thinking, as far as some sort of advice that you could give to your younger self or young women who are thinking about doing MMA but are very on the fence or unsure, what are certain things that you could say to them?
Well, I mean, I think of a few different things in that. I mean, I've said a couple times that I think I got really lucky in terms of the people that I found, and I think that there are plenty of training contexts I could have found myself in where I would not have been able to stick it out through the difficulties that I've had. I think it's not that, nowhere's perfect. I'm not saying that I haven't had difficulties in terms of, MMA is a very male dominated culture. There's a lot of obstacles from, the weight cutting to the things that women deal with in martial arts contexts all the time, sexualization and, random, sexism that you don't feel like putting up with every day, that, even well-intentioned people can, implement. All of those things are true. Um, but I would say finding a context, whatever that looks like, where you have support through those things, um, is number one. If you can find women who teach the martial art that you want to teach, that's a big deal. I have never met a female martial arts coach yet. I I can count the number of female fighters that I have met or had the privilege of practicing with on one hand, and that's there's more in like specifically kickboxing or jiu-jitsu, but MMA, there's not that many women. So finding a context, whether it's supportive, men who will work with you and train you and understand that these obstacles that you're facing should not have to mean that you have less access to training, should not have to mean that you can't do what you were able to do. I hope that a future exists where it's easier for women to stick it out, to be able to find a good gym, to be able to get through the difficulties that are there, and to be able to find opponents, even where there are more of us. I want that to be the case, and I'm hoping that the experience that I'm getting will not only help me um, you know get where I want to go in terms of being able to get more fight experience, but I also hope that I can use that down the line to make this more accessible to other women, and to help build that supportive network that can hopefully support me and other people as well, would be my hope.
Yeah. What is your goal in like the next year, 2 years for your MMA?
Um, I just want to keep learning. I mean, I think that's where I fell with this one too, of that I am not, I don't have plans to like be a professional MMA fighter. I'm not saying I wouldn't do that. I'm just also not perceiving that as a likely option for me in the future. Like I said, I'm not really the typical student. I just I consider myself so lucky to have found this outlet
Mhm.
for what I am, um, more talented at than I usually will let myself, sort of own, I guess, because the obstacles can make you feel like you shouldn't be there, you shouldn't be trying, and if that can happen to me with the luck and the level of training that I've had over time, and the support, and the networks that I have, you can only imagine how difficult it would be for, women who don't have that, women who
Yeah,
are,
for
you know,
sure.
have less sort of like power and resources. It's very, very difficult. Um, so I want to keep training is my main thing. I want to keep learning. I want to keep, for myself, being able to learn from, not despite the challenges that I'm having, but I think that those are the things that are actually teaching me the most
Yeah,
when
for
I can
sure.
understand them that way, which I think I'm in the process of getting more self-aware about. I haven't figured this out yet. It's just new.
Yeah.
I want to keep training. I want to keep fighting. I might be able to in July if they can find me an opponent. So cross your fingers for me, anyone listening, that you that they're able to find me someone. Um, and then I want to keep learning from the opportunities that I have. I have a really good few teachers, and I have a really good support with all of that. So I want to take advantage of that. And then, like I was saying, I want to use that. I want to use that to inform being able to, martial arts and self-defense are not the same thing. I should say that through this. We're talking about the crossovers and the way
Yeah.
that are going to interplay for people who do have, move in both those worlds. It's interesting. I'm still learning how to separate and relate the two in different ways.
Yeah.
They're not the same thing, but I want more access for both of them, for the related and the separate benefits that they can have. I want to use what I'm learning with myself as a test subject, to hopefully make that circle bigger and mean that, I hope I have students in 15 years that don't have as much trouble getting opponents as I do, and
Yeah.
that don't have as much, difficulty in getting the level of support that I've been able to gain, that they're able to not repeat the work that I'm doing and that I know other women are doing all over the world to be involved in this sport. There's a lot of good examples, but there just needs to be a lot more.
Yeah. Well, how can people find you? What's a way that they could follow your work, especially if you have a match possibly in July?
Yeah, anyone, ideally in the Pacific Northwest, any highways out there I haven't met, you want to, hit me up about fighting, let's do it, or, get in touch with my coach. But I, for martial arts stuff, I mainly use Instagram for networking. My handle is RCHL or Rachel NN, RACHELNN. And I am an ESD instructor. I do work with in my local community teaching. I'm hoping to start teaching more again now that the pandemic is changing circumstances a little bit. I also work with organizing for empowerment self-defense access, so being able to not just spread this where I live, but be part of spreading it all over the world. So if you're interested in getting more involved with networks of women that are working in self-defense and martial arts, places to look are like the National Women's Martial Arts Federation has been around for a long time, with not a whole lot of combat sports in it yet. I would like to see more networking of women in combat sports, specifically, more so than just martial arts. There's a little bit of a difference there. But I would definitely check out the Federation, their platforms, joining as a member. They have an annual conference. And then for self-defense, ESD Global Self-Defense is a nonprofit that trains empowerment self-defense instructors. So if you're interested in getting more information about empowerment self-defense in general, or getting involved with the ESD access movement, or getting trained as an instructor, they're a really good place to look for. And the third thing I would say, though, is that if you are lucky enough to have an ESD provider in your actual local area on the ground, or a good martial arts gym of any kind, whether it's MMA or Aikido or Tai Chi or anything, if you are, identified with that, or even if you're not, and you know of a good context that supports women training, that supports women teaching, that makes this more accessible to people, find a way to support them, like refer to them, donate to them, go to classes, whatever you can do to keep that going, especially after COVID, when a lot of gyms and a lot of places have been struggling to stay open. I think nothing can replace local on the ground access to martial arts, and to building that network in a real way with people actually where you live and where you can train and you can develop those networks. There's nothing like it once you can find something like that. So in terms of big picture stuff, looking at those two organizations, among many others, those are two that I personally would recommend. And then, looking for what's available in your area, and then just not falling into the trap that I am constantly trying to not fall into, of thinking that that's not meant for you. Like, if it feels like it's not meant for you, then something needs to change with what's happening where you are. There's reasons why there's fewer women in martial arts, and it is not lack of interest. Because once you build something that actually engages and serves women, and teaches martial arts or combat sports, the demand is there. In my experience, it's that we're not filling it in a way that fosters it and that engages women. So trainers out there that are actively doing that and actively making that possible are really important. We should do everything we can to support them.
Absolutely. So, Rachel, is there anything else that you just wanted to say before we close?
Not really. Thank you for having me on. It's good to talk about all of this. I feel like I was, like I said, I was excited to do this interview because we, share like professional networks, and I wanted to talk about ESD, but also just because I am everyone is a beginner in the best of themselves, I think. And it's been a situation with MMA where I've had to sort of lean into being like, okay, this is difficult, and you have to sort of publicly process why this is difficult, and figure this out on the fly because you don't understand it yet. So getting to talk to you about it, as someone who also has ESD and martial arts experience, is valuable for me too, just to understand myself as one case example before we can start making it more accessible to other women too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Aloha, folks, and just definitely check out her bio. And I have her social media links on there. So take a look, follow, like, there you go, and have a great one.
Thanks, y'all.